Good morning. Welcome to Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Worship Associate Ruth Trudeau, here to welcome you this morning. All of you, families, individuals, couples, all of you, straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, all of you, the seekers, believers, and doubters, you who are thinkers and doers and dreamers of hope, you teachers and students of diversity and inclusion, all are welcome. You can find more about our church and our faith on our website at horizonuu.org. And I invite you to join us this morning for our virtual coffee hour at 11:30. You can find the link for the coffee hour at horizonuu.org. This morning you'll have time to check in with others and to reflect on today's message. Our worship leader this morning is Interim Minister Meredith Barber.
Hear the words of our call to worship this morning, written by Elena Westbrook. She writes, "A speckled egg in leaves inside of a bird's nest. When all around us voices are raised in anger, hatred spilling into the streets and sparking more hatred, sometimes the best we can do is to sink our hands into the soil. Let the fights over abstractions ebb away, flow like water into the earth. Fill your fingers with dirt that is itself the product of rocks worn to powder over millennia, leavened with particles of other lives. Lives of leaves and vegetables and other animals, once as warm and active as you are now. Everything dies and returns to its source, breaks down into the ingredients of some new life. Bits of humus, squirming bacteria, a tiny egg. This is real. The sun warm on your back, the soil cool under your bare feet. A tiny new stem that will unfurl to grow a sweet red tomato. And the hand of a friend gently helping you to rise. Even on our most difficult days, we can touch the soil and be grateful for the earth and the love that sustains us. Come, let us worship together." Our chalice lighting this morning comes from a poem I came across as I was writing this week by the poet Aja Monet, and it's called "The Labor Movement." I never met a woman who wasn't fighting for freedom, an entire life to trust what truth reveals. I invite you to say with me now the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth. Thus do we covenant together.
"'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right."
This month, you all have chosen to support diverse and revolutionary Unitarian Universalist multicultural ministries, or DRUM. This group is a people of color ministry and anti-racist collective that has been central to supporting the ministries of my colleagues of color as well as those of lay people. Drum brings lay and religious professionals together to overcome racism through resistance and to transform Unitarian Universalism through their multicultural experiences. The offering will now be joyfully given and received.
The reading this morning is a poem, My Father's Lunch by Erica Funkhauser. I like this poem because it reminds me of my father. He loved to work with his hands. He was the great-grandson of immigrants to this country. He was raised on a farm in East Texas, and he taught me and my siblings the value and poetry of work. We were adults before we realized that raising a family was hard work, but my father did it with such grace. I think this poem could be titled My Father's Work, but it's not. My Father's Lunch by Erica Funkhauser. Saturday afternoon, he'd sit at the kitchen table in khakis and a work shirt. White napkin, a beer, the serrated knife, pieces of prosciutto or head cheese or kippered herring layered on slabs of black bread. Outside, the ripe hay fields or the stacks of shutters or the forest needing to be cleared or the snow needing to be pushed aside lay still as they waited for him to finish his lunch. For now, he was ours, whether he smelled of choke cherry, tractor oil, or twine. He'd washed his hands with brown naphtha soap and splashed water onto his face and shaken it off like a dog. He'd offer more ham, more bread to anyone who sat down. This was work, too, but he did it slowly, with no impatience, not yet reminding the older boys that he'd need them later, or asking the small children if we'd shoveled last year's hay out of the wonderful window to nowhere. This was the interlude of nearly translucent slices, of leaning back in the smooth wooden chair and wiping white foam from his lips as the last beads of beer rose in the glass. We could see it was an old meal with the patina of dream going back to the first days of bread and meat and work.
I invite you to join me now in a moment of meditation or prayer. Loving God, Spirit of life, mystery in which we live and move and have our being, be with us this morning. We give thanks this morning for the chance to be together. We give thanks for chances to gather outside this past week with church friends, old and new, under cool shade. What a renewal. Thank you. We give thanks today for things we often forget. Food, water, electricity, all those things we take for granted that so many are without right now. We give thanks for communities like this one, where we can bring our full selves, where we can be fully seen and known and loved. We lament this week the struggles of all those living the reality of climate disaster, those fleeing fire and hurricanes, those who have lost everything. The devastation that worsens with each passing year is heartbreaking. God of justice, we are filled with righteous anger at new restrictive abortion legislation in Texas that further restricts people's rights to make choices about their own bodies. We know that this is about control. Help us to find ways to help those who need it most during this difficult time. Spirit of life, forgive us and let us forgive ourselves for all the ways this week and every week that we have been reactive, stressed, quick to anger, and maybe not quick enough to apologize. Help us to get up tomorrow and try again, for all these little moments strung together make up a life. May it be so. Amen. Our second reading this morning comes from 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 13. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat. Otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went into the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Here ends the reading. A few years ago, in my work with a youth group, I accompanied them on a service trip to Pipestem, West Virginia. Our trip was part service and part cultural immersion for these kids from Massachusetts. And to be clear, this was their idea. As young teens, they realized there was so much more about the world that they didn't yet understand, definitely more than I knew at that age. We spent long days helping to prepare a double wide for a kind man in his early 40s whose house was no longer functional. We painted his parents' house right next door that had needed it for quite a while. They were small things we did, but the youth felt good about their work. We watched fireworks, waded in the New River, more on that next week, and I took tons of pictures of the mountains, especially the sunrises and the sunsets. The whole time I felt kind of caught between two worlds, watching these kids confused at the way the locals were living and realizing that sometimes I understood the West Virginia people better than the Massachusetts kids I had come here with. One of our last immersion experiences was a trip up a mountain in Mingo County, West Virginia. After our hike, we gazed down at a mountaintop removal site. The entire mountain had been slowly blasted away to access the coal within. If you've never seen something like this, it will take your breath away and make you want to cry at the same time. Mountains are almost alive, lush and green, at least in that part of the country, with their own weather patterns, their own air, and their own way of life. It felt wrong to see something once so alive, now so decidedly not, looking gray and dusty and dry. We continued walking, examining stone monuments dedicated to the mine wars that had taken place there and cabins where mining families lived. Of course, the story here is complicated because in these mountain places, coal mining has passed from generation to generation. Though no one wants their child to go down in the mines, it's almost a fact of life. And when they do, the miner pride runs deep. I'll just say that I saw more obscene bumper stickers about being a coal miner on that trip than I have for the rest of my life. But coal and mining culture is just one visible microcosm of all the ways that this plays out in all aspects of American society. The history of the labor movement in this country is a bloody one. Throughout modern time, those of us who have dared to suggest that working people deserve a fair wage, deserve safe working conditions, and especially deserve to rest, have found themselves at odds with those in power. Under capitalism, there will always be a small group of people profiting from other people's pain and labor. I think on some level we all know this, much as we might have preferences about where we spend our money. I also watched friends working in jobs that we praised in March of 2020 as heroes get constantly dragged down this past year, more and more anxious as they interacted with the demands of the general public. Southwest Airlines last week issued a general apology to their workers for the hot mess that was the summer travel season. And if you traveled by plane this summer, I am certain that you understand. In the words of comedian Karen Kilgariff, people are just aggressive, rude, and strangely angry. A lot of people are dealing with deep-seated issues and they don't know how. They're not getting help, they're just taking a flight. She goes on, do you think people want to be fighting with anti-maskers who are basically screaming at the top of their lungs, I need therapy, but I'm afraid? I couldn't have said it better myself. So in the context of all of that, I am here today to preach about rest and resistance. There is this idea that's swirling in religious professional circles right now, that everything is in motion, that we're transforming, that we don't know what kind of church we'll be returning to when we can come back in person. That's all true, and a part of me loves this idea of transformation and change and the space that makes to do things differently and to think more creatively. But at the same time, when we start talking about reimagining the future of church and worship and everything we do, my most critical side takes over. What if I don't feel like it? And part of me has been thinking, I don't have time to transform anything. I've been too busy just trying to survive. The part of me that believes in the work of transforming and of collective liberation needs to be rested and fed and cared for in order to move wholeheartedly into that work that takes everything I have to give. And I often wonder, how do we do work that will last a lifetime? Well, I don't know for sure, but slowly for one thing, a little bit at a time, with rest in between. I know the thing that is on most of our minds is the return to church in person. I want it so badly, just as much as you, I promise. Many aspects of my own life have returned to normal and then changed again as the Delta variant has made its way into our midst. It's kind of a balancing act, almost like a tightrope. We know there's no such thing as normal. We know that we'll be dealing with the effects of this for a long time. And at a certain point, we also have to find a way to live that fulfills us, including our spiritual lives. We are on a journey to try to figure out what that looks like. And I wonder too if this push and rush to already have everything planned and figured out is part of white supremacy culture showing up within all of us. I know we may all be in different places with that term, and that's okay. There's no place to begin except where you are. White supremacy culture is not about Klansmen or Nazis, but instead about cultural norms in American society. Things so baked into the way we live our lives that they need to be pointed out to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't even recognize them. Take perfectionism, for example. The belief that there's one right way to approach a task. Mistakes are seen as moral failings of a specific person rather than information about how systems work. There's a sense of urgency, a focus on the amount of stuff you've accomplished rather than doing a few things really well. Defensiveness, the idea that having any kind of conflict is bad, that the person who raises an issue is therefore a problem. How dare someone directly communicate issues with us? And perhaps most prescient in American society in the future of our faith is our commitment to individualism, our tendency to prioritize ourselves over the larger group, our commitment to autonomy at all costs, and our fear of platonic physical touch. I think we all know on some level that if we are to survive, we need one another in a lot of different ways. So this week I'm wondering with you, what is our work? Over the past week alone, we've watched as climate disaster has ravaged this nation. Fires are burning in California, and a lot of people here in Louisiana have lost everything to Hurricane Ida. And even here in my city of Shreveport, there are many folks evacuated from South Louisiana. Maybe top of mind for all of us as I'm writing this is the new abortion legislation in Texas that's rooted in control and misogyny. Those of us who know that reproductive justice saves lives are heartbroken. As faithful people, as people who unapologetically make space for liberal religion here in Dallas, where are we in all of this? I believe in the oft-repeated quote attributed to both Theodore Parker and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." But I think it only works that way because there are people that bend it. We all have little areas of our lives where we can make change, and that truth has kept me going for years and years. My brain can almost feast on the hope that lies within it. Rest is also part of our work. The road to liberation is long, and we simply cannot afford to burn out. There are so many times when it would be easier to just jump in and do everything ourselves and let others figure it out while we're away. And part of our obligation to one another is learning these boundaries, even when they take time and energy to hold. This is some of the most difficult work that we do. As ministers, rest and study are built into our work weeks. I know this is an extreme privilege, and I think that modeling this is part of the work too. It takes time away. Time just going for walks and being with family and doing whatever we do that makes us feel alive, that allows the work of ministry to really take place. I recharge by taking time to read what I want to, even romance and thrillers, and giving myself permission to put down and let go of what doesn't serve me. I recently saw a quote from Susan Frederick Gray, our UUA president. She said, "Rest is critical for the quality and sustainability of our work. And renewal requires more than simply not working. It means pursuing activities that bring joy and spark creativity in new ways." These ideas about rest are not new at all. In fact, they are as old as time. I'm not really a biblically based preacher, but I saw this tweet recently from Joy Clarkson that was about the story of Elijah and his frustration and the power of taking a nap and having a snack. I vaguely remembered the story from my Hebrew Bible class and had to go find it again and share it with all of you. So, like Clarkson described, Elijah was so angry at himself for what he had done and was afraid because people were chasing him, trying to kill him. He was filled with rage to the point where he didn't want to live anymore. But an angel came to him and told him to eat, otherwise your journey will be too much for you. And then he rested in a cave. The next day, God appeared to him, asking, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I guess I see this as the biblical model of self-care forcefully imposed by an angel when we least expect it. And it reinforces the idea that rest is holy, a way to connect with the divine. I've preached on rest before, and this certainly won't be the last time. As ministers, most of us have things. One of mine is the idea that our emotions are signposts for our values, and we'll have plenty of time to talk more about that during my time here. But another one of my things is rest as resistance in the work of the NAP ministry. The NAP ministry was founded by Tricia Hersey, maybe better known as the NAP Bishop. Hersey has decades of experience as a community organizer and performance artist, as well as a chaplain. A graduate of Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Hersey's work is rooted in liberation and womanist theologies. I first discovered the NAP ministry one night when I was still a grad student, tired, not done with my reading, but really, really ready to get to bed, taking a break and scrolling Instagram. And here was this account preaching rest as radical renewal, and that I was worthy no matter whether I had finished every bit of reading for class or not. It was the same idea that other people had been trying to still in me for a while, but it hit me differently. Because there was this liberatory element to it. My worth was not tied up in how much I could do. And maybe most telling, why was this the first time I was considering this idea? Now, the irony of this is that I actually don't nap. I've learned that that's not really the best way for my body to recharge. But what I do know about ministry and about life is that I do much better when I'm rested, relaxed, and I've taken time to be quiet and still. My brain works better, I'm happier, I'm more myself, and I'm much easier to be around. And I suspect that might be true for each of you as well. But the trick, and this is where the work of the NAP ministry comes in, is that we don't earn rest. If we waited until we were all at inbox zero to relax, we'd constantly be running on empty. We'd be running ourselves into the ground so hard that we wouldn't be able to keep going long term. Instead, we learn to trust ourselves. We rest when we feel tired. We know that we know what's best for us. There's an old idea that my preaching teacher, the Reverend Gary Smith, shared with us during my first few weeks at Harvard, that we as preachers only really have one sermon inside of us, and we spend our entire lives preaching versions of the same thing. There's some freedom in the belief that there's no such thing as an original idea. It takes some of the pressure off. I'm not sure if I believe this or not. Maybe time will tell. But I would be okay with this being my only message. That rest allows us to resist the system we're caught up in that tells us we're only worthy if we produce a product. That all that matters is that we keep going. That quantity matters more than quality. That takes away our ability to do things simply because they bring joy and to do work that matters as people of faith. It takes away our humanity. The NAP ministry is built on the idea that we're all worthy of rest, an extension, one might say, of our first principle on inherent worth and dignity. We've talked a lot this morning about rest as resistance. So I imagine you might be wondering, resistance to what exactly? I think that rest can be one of many antidotes to white supremacy culture, to the rushing, the perfectionism, the sense of urgency that we talked about earlier, the expectation that we always have it all figured out. Rest is also a small way for each of us to rise up against our system that I believe to be morally bankrupt, that tells us that our worth is based on our productivity and refuses to meet people's basic human needs. Many of you are probably familiar with this history, but it's important for us as Unitarian Universalists to understand that we have roots in American Protestantism that is inherently tied to the ideas of the Protestant work ethic that's still prevalent in American culture today, that undergirds pretty much all of what we've been talking about this morning. We are far from the only ones who are connected to these ideas, but these roots run deep. We are all working to understand where this stuff shows up in our culture and in our very selves. It will take a lifetime to work through some of this. It runs so deep. So again, I am here wondering with you, what is our work? And how do we do the work of a lifetime? For one thing, we rest when we need to because we are worthy. We don't earn rest. We are enough, just as we are. For another, we slow down. We move at a pace that is sustainable. And we admit that we don't have all the answers, that we never will, and that there will never be a right time. And I think most important of all, we don't try to go it alone. May it be so. Amen.
I invite you to join me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish the chalice flame, but not our commitment to our mission, to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. We carry this commitment in our hearts because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to strive in a just world.
dance with you. May I have this dance with you, through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Let a dancing song be heard. Play the music, say the words, and fill the sky with sailing birds. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Learn to follow, learn to lead. Feel the rhythm, feel the beat. To make the harvest of the seed. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance with you. May I have this dance with you, through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Everybody turn and spin. Let your body learn to bend. And like a willow with the wind. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. A child is born, the old must die. A time for joy, a time to cry. Take it as it passes by. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you, through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Morning star comes out at night. Without the dark there is no light. If nothing's wrong and nothing's right, let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let the sunshine, let it rain. Share the laughter, bear the pain. And round we go again. Let it be a dance.
Friends, as we go forth from our time together this morning, let us remember that our work, our rest, and our resistance are all intertwined. Let it be a dance. Amen.